The story of the Whittaker family has always been one that draws emotion, sympathy, fascination, and, in recent months, outrage. What began as an eye-opening look into one of America's most isolated families has slowly turned into a bitter feud among the very people who once claimed to help them. And now, after months of speculation, whispers, and leaked information, a troubling picture has emerged. Eric Carroll, once seen as a friend and advocate for the Whittakers, is looking far worse in the public eye than Patrick ever did. For a long time, Patrick was the easy target. The accusations of exploitation, the claims of unpaid funds, and the misunderstandings surrounding his intentions all painted him as the villain of this saga. But as new facts have surfaced, and as more people inside the situation have started speaking out, that narrative is beginning to shift. And it's not just shifting, it's collapsing. It started quietly. A few missing updates on the Whittaker family's situation. Some confusion over who was managing their YouTube channel. And a noticeable absence. Eric wasn't posting, wasn't responding, wasn't explaining anything. At first, supporters assumed he was working behind the scenes. After all, he'd positioned himself as the one who truly cared, the one who would do what others didn't. But then the silence started feeling intentional. Questions began pouring into forums, comment sections, and Facebook groups. Why hasn't Eric updated the GoFundMe? Where's the money going now? Why are the Whittakers still struggling if all that help came in? And perhaps the most biting question of all. Was Eric ever really trying to help them, or was he helping himself? For a man who built his brand on transparency, Eric's lack of answers became louder than any explanation he could have given. Patrick, meanwhile, had stepped back from the chaos. His critics called it guilt. His supporters called it self-preservation. Either way, he'd stopped fighting online. And that silence turned out to work in his favor. While Eric's name was being dragged through accusations of manipulation and greed, Patrick was quietly rebuilding trust. He wasn't uploading dramatic videos or pointing fingers anymore. He was sharing small updates, staying consistent, and, more importantly, keeping his focus on the Whittakers themselves. It didn't take long for people to notice the difference. Where Eric's videos started feeling defensive and bitter, Patrick's tone was calm, even remorseful. He admitted mistakes. He didn't blame others. And for an audience growing tired of constant feuds and finger-pointing, that humility hit harder than any proof could. Behind the scenes, people who'd once supported Eric started whispering about the way he'd handled things. Some claimed he'd refused to share donation records. Others said he'd been telling different stories to different people, making himself look like the hero in every version. And then came the leak. Screenshots surfaced from a private message thread suggesting that Eric had kept full control over monetization for the Whittaker-related content, even after claiming he'd stepped away. If true, that would mean the very videos meant to raise awareness were still generating income. For him, not the family. When confronted, Eric dismissed it as a misunderstanding. He said he was managing the back end to ensure payments were distributed fairly. But when asked for proof, payment records, receipts, or even confirmation from the family, nothing came. Patrick didn't have to say a word. The silence from Eric spoke volumes. Locals in Odd, West Virginia, had also started speaking up. One neighbor reportedly said, "They ain't seen Eric in months. Used to come around with cameras and talk big about helping. Now, nothing." Meanwhile, Patrick had been spotted quietly visiting the family, bringing groceries and clothes. He didn't film it. He didn't post it. But word spread anyway. In a community that values privacy and respect, actions matter more than uploads, and that small difference between the two men was starting to define them. For many followers, it was the first time they realized how little they actually knew about what went on behind the camera. The online debates grew uglier. Some of Eric's defenders accused Patrick of orchestrating a smear campaign. Others pointed out that every time new allegations surfaced against Eric, he'd vanish for a few days, then come back with emotional rants or carefully edited proof videos that only deepened the confusion. It was messy and it was sad, because at the center of all this wasn't just two men fighting. It was a family, already fragile and misunderstood, being dragged through a digital storm they couldn't possibly comprehend. Larry and Betty had become symbols of poverty, of resilience, of tragedy, but now they were also unwilling pawns in a feud between the people who were supposed to protect them. One of the most disturbing details came from an interview clip that resurfaced, one where Eric had claimed the Whittakers didn't understand what fame meant. Critics pounced on that line. If they didn't understand, why did you put them online? How do you film people who can't give informed consent? It was the same ethical question that had followed every documentary-style project since the beginning of YouTube, and now it was hitting Eric harder than anyone before him. What started as a moral debate about representation had turned into a direct indictment of his character. And that's when the state stepped in. Multiple reports began circulating that Child and Family Services had been contacted again about the Whittakers' living conditions. No one could say for certain whether Eric or Patrick had anything to do with it, but the timing raised eyebrows. Some believed Eric had made the call himself to cover his tracks, ensuring that if anyone asked, he could say he'd done the responsible thing. Others thought it was internet vigilantes, people convinced they were saving the family by involving authorities. Whatever the truth, the result was the same: stress, panic, and confusion for Betty and Larry. Mark Lyta, who had originally brought the family's story to light, reportedly tried to intervene quietly. Sources close to the production said Mark had grown tired of the drama, seeing it as a distraction from what mattered most, the welfare of the Whittakers themselves. And while Eric and Patrick fought over narratives, Mark was back to doing what he'd always done best, focusing on the people, not the politics. By the time November rolled around, the situation had deteriorated beyond repair. Eric's credibility was crumbling, Patrick's redemption arc was gaining traction, and the family at the heart of it all was once again left to bear the consequences. Larry's health had reportedly declined. Betty had stopped answering most calls. Neighbors said they rarely saw them outside anymore. Whatever good intentions might have existed in the beginning had been buried under layers of suspicion and ego. It wasn't about helping anymore. It was about who could claim ownership of the story. Online forums began sharing side-by-side comparisons, screenshots of Eric's statements next to Patrick's, timelines of who did what and when, and deep dives into donation patterns. Each new discovery made Eric look worse. The contradictions, the inconsistencies, the defensiveness, it was all out there. Patrick wasn't painted as a saint, but compared to Eric, he was starting to look like the only one who hadn't completely lost his humanity. And the saddest part? The Whittakers themselves had no idea just how bad it had gotten. In their world, there were no Reddit threads, no expose videos, no YouTube battles. There was just the same old routine: feeding the dogs, keeping warm, waiting for visitors who might never come again. To them, the story had never been about fame or money or online wars. It had been about survival. But to everyone else, it had become a battleground for clout and control. By the end of part one thing is clear: the story that once made the world care about the Whittakers has turned into something far darker. And as more information continues to surface, it's becoming impossible to ignore. Eric doesn't just look worse than Patrick, he looks finished. Comment below. Do you believe Eric was ever genuine in helping the Whittakers, or was it always about control and image from the start? Hey everyone, before we get into the next part, I've got something special to share with you. If you're all about making your home smarter, cozier, and just a little bit more you, then you've got to check this out. We've partnered with Trekbo.com, a place built for people who love clever solutions and everyday comfort. From wellness and skincare must-haves to smart home gadgets, heated gear, and lifestyle tech, Trekbow is packed with products that make life easier, warmer, and way more fun. I've personally picked some of my favorite finds, things that actually work, look great, and make your day smoother. Whether it's something to simplify your morning routine, help you unwind after a long day, or bring a little innovation into your home, you'll find it there. So before you scroll past, take a quick look at trekbow.com. Trust me, it's full of discoveries waiting to make your everyday better. Alright, now let's get back to it, because after this video, you're definitely going to want to explore what Trekbow has in store for the Whittaker household community. When the first accusations against Eric Carroll started spreading online, most people dismissed them as internet drama, the kind of gossip that inevitably follows anyone who touches a viral story. But what began as whispers soon became a steady roar, amplified by screenshots, deleted posts, and former supporters stepping forward with their own accounts. And just like that, the narrative flipped. For months, Eric had positioned himself as the responsible one, the man who supposedly stepped in after Patrick's supposed missteps, who wanted to protect the family from exploitation. But now, those same words were being used against him. It began with money. When the first donation drives were launched for the Whittakers, thousands of supporters gave generously. The family's living situation had tugged on everyone's heartstrings, their isolation, their resilience, their sheer humanity. The world wanted to help. The GoFundMe campaigns, PayPal donations, and direct contributions through social media channels quickly raised tens of thousands of dollars. Eric, according to his public statements, had been managing those funds to help stabilize the Whittaker family's situation, providing them with transportation, home repairs, and legal assistance. But soon questions surfaced. Where did all that money go? A moderator from one of Patrick's fan pages came forward with a lengthy post, claiming she had been part of early discussions about how to handle donations, and that Eric refused to share financial details with anyone, even those helping coordinate the charity work. Every time we asked for a breakdown or receipts, she wrote, Eric told us it was being handled. He said there were legal reasons he couldn't disclose specifics. But after a while, it felt like he was hiding more than just paperwork. Another user, who said they had volunteered to help deliver supplies, claimed Eric had promised reimbursements that never came. Others accused him of redirecting the funds for production costs tied to his YouTube content. When these accusations hit the comment sections, Eric responded with a familiar defense. You don't know the full story. But that excuse was losing power fast. Meanwhile, Patrick was slowly starting to re-emerge. For months, he had stayed quiet, avoiding direct engagement with Eric or the online arguments. He posted rarely, and when he did, it was brief and measured. But now, with Eric's credibility unraveling, Patrick began addressing specific claims, not with dramatic accusations, but with facts. He released screenshots of his own messages, showing that he had tried multiple times to contact Eric about financial transparency and the family's welfare. He had asked for updates, for accountability, for cooperation, and in every case, the messages went unanswered. Patrick's supporters rallied quickly. Patrick may not have done everything right, one commenter wrote, but at least he's not lying about it. Eric has been deflecting since day one. It was a subtle shift, but a powerful one. The same online community that once saw Patrick as the villain was now turning its suspicion toward Eric, and the more Eric tried to defend himself, the worse it got. Then came the videos. Clips resurfaced from Eric's past live streams, moments that once seemed harmless, but now carried a very different tone. In one, he brushed off questions about the Whittakers' legal status with a smirk, saying, "If I told you everything, you wouldn't believe it anyway." In another, he appeared to mock Patrick's fundraising methods, calling them chaotic, before claiming his own were professional and monitored. Those same, monitored donations were now the subject of intense scrutiny. Even worse, it was revealed that the main YouTube channel featuring Whittaker-related content, a channel Eric allegedly transferred to the family, was still registered under his own management system. That meant he was still collecting ad revenue, memberships, and super chat earnings tied to their image. When viewers pointed this out, Eric once again went quiet. The silence became an answer of its own. Offline, the situation was spiraling. Reports began circulating that the Whittakers' living conditions had worsened in recent months. The septic system issue, which had been a major concern flagged by state authorities, still hadn't been resolved. The family faced a possible 30-day eviction order unless repairs were made. At first, it was assumed that the funds from donations would cover this, but no visible progress was happening. Supporters who had believed Eric's earlier promises were now furious. They flooded comment sections, demanding accountability. "You said you'd handle this. Where's the money, Eric? Why are they still suffering while you're making videos about awareness?" The outrage grew so strong that even neutral channels began covering the controversy, analyzing donation timelines, and tracking inconsistencies. For every new piece of evidence Eric provided, 2 more contradictions appeared. Patrick, for his part, wasn't entirely off the hook. Some accused him of opportunism, claiming he was only speaking up now that Eric's reputation was collapsing. Others pointed out that he had also benefited financially during the family's rise to viral fame. But the difference was simple: Patrick had receipts. He began sharing bank screenshots and transaction histories tied to specific projects, proving where certain amounts had gone: food, clothing, utilities, even small stipends directly handed to Betty. It wasn't perfect accounting, but it was something tangible, and it bought him back a measure of credibility. Eric, on the other hand, continued to insist that he had done nothing wrong, without offering a single piece of documentation. "I've helped more people than any of you will ever know," he wrote in a defensive post. "Just because I don't show it doesn't mean it didn't happen." To an audience already skeptical of vague statements that sounded more like guilt than humility. Behind closed doors, the fallout was hitting hard. The Whittakers, already reeling from years of exposure, were once again caught in a conflict they didn't understand. Neighbors reported seeing Betty crying on the porch, while Larry refused to answer questions about Eric or Patrick. The family's trust in outsiders, something that had taken decades to build, had shattered completely. One volunteer who had previously worked with both men described the mood this way: "They don't know who's telling the truth anymore. To them, everyone's just talking, but nobody's helping." It was a devastating irony. The family that had once been lifted up as a symbol of compassion and awareness was now the casualty of ego and greed. Then another revelation hit. A former collaborator of Eric's, someone who had helped manage his social media, came forward anonymously with claims that Eric had intentionally manipulated the narrative to turn public sympathy in his favor. "He told me from the beginning that the Whittaker story was a gold mine," the source said. "He said people would eat it up: the poverty, the inbreeding rumors, the shock factor. He wasn't interested in their well-being. He was interested in how it made him look." That quote spread like wildfire. It was the exact kind of behind-the-scenes confirmation the internet had been waiting for. And once it landed, Eric's image began to crumble completely. Within days, his channel's comments section turned against him. Viewers unsubscribed in waves. Donations dried up. Even longtime fans admitted they could no longer defend him. The emotional toll on the Whittakers was immeasurable. Friends close to the family said Betty had begun refusing visits from outsiders entirely. The dogs barked at anyone who came up the driveway. Larry, normally quiet but polite, had grown withdrawn and suspicious. And while online debates raged about accountability and ethics, the people who mattered most, the Whittakers themselves, were back where they started, isolated, vulnerable, and caught in the crossfire of other people's ambitions. Patrick addressed it gently in one of his last videos. Sitting in a quiet room, he looked into the camera and said, "It's not about me or Eric. It's about them. We all lost sight of that somewhere along the way." The video was short, subdued, and free of drama. He didn't mention Eric's name again. That silence spoke volumes. For once, Patrick wasn't fighting to clear his image, he was acknowledging the damage done. And while Eric continued doubling down, calling everyone liars and haters, Patrick was slowly, quietly winning back something far more valuable than online followers: integrity. The situation had reached a point of no return. Even if Eric came forward with receipts tomorrow, few would believe him. The damage to his credibility and to the Whittaker family's peace was too deep. The internet, which had once idolized him as the savior of a forgotten family, now saw him as the very thing he'd claimed to oppose. And as one commenter perfectly summarized beneath Patrick's latest post, "The truth always comes out. It just takes time. Eric's time is up." Comment below. Do you think Eric can still redeem himself, or has his silence already proven everything we need to know? When you strip away the online noise, the debates, the videos, and the speculation, what's left in this entire situation is one simple thing: trust. And that's exactly what's been lost. Not just between Eric Carroll and Patrick, or between Eric and the online community, but between everyone and the people at the center of this, the Whittaker family themselves. They were never supposed to be part of a fight. They were never meant to become talking points for creators and channels. But that's what it's become: a war of words, clout, and damaged reputations. And as the story has evolved, one thing's become clear: Eric Carroll isn't just being questioned. He's being exposed. It all started unraveling when Eric tried to reclaim control of the narrative. After weeks of silence and increasing backlash, he uploaded a long video titled, "Setting the Record Straight." In it, he claimed that false narratives were being spread about him and that Patrick, along with others, were twisting facts for attention. He said he had always acted in the best interest of the Whittaker family and that any suggestion otherwise was part of a coordinated smear. But the problem wasn't what he said, it was what he didn't say. He didn't provide any proof. No financial statements. No receipts. No confirmation from the family. It was just Eric talking, defensive, sweating, shifting blame, and refusing to answer the questions people had been asking for months. "I never took money that wasn't mine," he said. "I've given more than I've gotten back. But I'm not going to play into their drama." But the internet wasn't satisfied anymore with vague reassurances. People wanted facts, and they wanted accountability. Patrick's supporters dissected every second of that video, pausing, rewinding, cross-referencing his words with public data, and the inconsistencies started stacking up like a wall. First, Eric said he wasn't in charge of any current donations. But users quickly showed screenshots of active links still tied to his accounts. The donation pages, the YouTube memberships, even an old Patreon, all still directing funds through his system. Then he said he hadn't spoken with Betty in months. That was true, but it raised a bigger question. If he was the one supposedly helping them, why hadn't he spoken to her? Multiple reports confirmed that Eric had avoided communication with both Betty and Larry after the investigation into the family's welfare began. Insiders said he told people privately that he didn't want to be dragged into their mess, implying the family themselves had become a liability. That statement spread quickly, and it was devastating. Because for many people, that one line showed the real Eric. The man who once claimed to protect the Whittakers was now distancing himself from them when things got complicated. Meanwhile, Patrick took a different approach. He went live one evening, not to attack, not to gossip, but to share what he described as the human side of the story. His stream was calm, even emotional. "You guys have no idea how much this has broken them," he said quietly. "They didn't ask for this. They don't understand what's going on online. They just know people stopped showing up, and that they keep hearing their names used in ways they don't recognize." It wasn't slick. It wasn't edited. But it hit hard. Viewers flooded the comments with empathy and anger, not at Patrick, but at Eric. How can someone claim to help a family and then disappear when things go wrong? Patrick made mistakes, sure, but Eric used them. You can't fix exploitation with more exploitation. By the time Patrick ended the stream, his viewer count had doubled. And Eric's reputation had crumbled even further. Then came the messages. Screenshots began circulating, alleged private conversations between Eric and a handful of his former supporters. In them, he appeared to blame everyone but himself. He accused Patrick of trying to steal the family's story. He accused moderators of being infiltrators. He accused the fans themselves of not understanding how business works. One particular message sent shockwaves through the community. "The Whittakers wouldn't even have food if it wasn't for me. People need to stop acting like they're victims. They've gotten more than they ever had." Those words, "stop acting like they're victims," burned through social media. Even people who had once defended Eric found it impossible to justify that. Because at the end of the day, no matter how messy or complicated things had gotten, the Whittakers were victims, not of pity, but of the entire situation that had spiraled far beyond their control. Locals in Odd, West Virginia, began sharing stories of what had really been happening on the ground. One neighbor, an older woman who had known the family for years, spoke to a local blog anonymously. "They've had people come and go for a while now. Some came with cameras, some came with food. Most just wanted something from them. But lately, they've just been left alone again. Larry don't say much, but Betty, she's been crying a lot. She misses when folks were kind, before all this internet business." That one quote captured everything wrong with what the story had become. This wasn't just a documentary anymore. It was exploitation wrapped in charity, and everyone involved, Eric included, had played a part. But Eric's role now looked deliberate. People began calling him the handler, a man who had turned empathy into economics. Meanwhile, reports surfaced that Eric had started reaching out privately to journalists and YouTubers, trying to correct the record. But rather than owning up, he focused on discrediting Patrick. He claimed Patrick had forged documents, manipulated fans, and used the family's name without authorization. But once again, no proof. And each time Eric went public, it only made things worse. His tone grew defensive, angry, desperate. One former supporter described his demeanor perfectly. "He sounds like someone who's losing control of a story he thought he owned." The financial side kept haunting him, too. A report from an independent content tracker revealed that several Whittaker-related videos on Eric's channel were still monetized, earning revenue long after he claimed to have stopped profiting. Even worse, those videos were generating thousands of views per week as the controversy deepened. The drama was fueling his income, and everyone saw it. "He's profiting off the chaos," one viewer wrote. "This isn't about the family anymore. It's about keeping people angry enough to watch." That comment summed it up. Because the more outrage there was, the more engagement his channel got, and the more his response videos paid him. Eric wasn't defending his name. He was monetizing his downfall. Patrick, on the other hand, seemed exhausted by it all. In one quiet moment during a Q&A, someone asked if he would ever work with Eric again. He paused, sighed, and said, "I just want them, the Whittakers, to be okay. That's it. I don't care who gets credit. I just want them safe." That single sentence, simple as it was, hit harder than any expose ever could. Because it wasn't just about who was right, it was about who still remembered why they started. Behind the scenes, the situation was turning bleak. The Whittakers were said to be under renewed state observation, likely triggered by all the reports and attention. Neighbors mentioned strange cars parked down the road. Maybe journalists, maybe curious visitors. Betty had become paranoid that they're coming to take us away. And that fear wasn't unfounded. With so many outsiders meddling, the state had reportedly reopened a welfare review. The very attention that was meant to help might now lead to forced intervention. It was the ultimate irony, and for those watching online, it was painful to see. As Eric's credibility fell apart, so did his alliances. A few of his own moderators turned against him publicly, releasing statements that accused him of manipulation and bullying. One even shared audio recordings of their conversations, Eric complaining about Patrick, insulting fans, and admitting he'd made mistakes but wasn't about to apologize. The recordings were messy, muffled, but authentic enough that no one doubted their source. The damage was irreversible. By the end of October, Eric's name had become toxic. His YouTube subscribers dropped. His Facebook page was flooded with angry comments. And the people who once stood by him had either gone quiet or defected to Patrick's side. It wasn't about fan loyalty anymore. It was about integrity. Even the biggest supporters of Eric's work admitted that the optics were terrible. At this point, one longtime follower wrote, "Even if he did mean well, the way he's handled everything makes it impossible to believe him." And through all of this, one truth kept echoing louder than ever. The Whittaker family never asked for any of this. They never asked for fame, for videos, for fundraisers, for internet wars. All they wanted was to live quietly, to be left in peace. Instead, they became the centerpiece of a feud between men chasing redemption and relevance, a feud that shattered whatever sense of safety they had left. The fall of trust wasn't just Eric's, it was collective. But his fall hit the hardest, because he had built his image on trust. And once that crumbled, there was nothing left beneath it but ego and excuses. The people who once saw him as a savior now saw him as something far worse, another outsider who came in with a camera and left chaos behind. And as one viewer wrote under Patrick's latest post, summing up what so many were feeling, Eric didn't just lose the family's trust. He lost ours. Comment below. Do you think Eric ever cared about the Whittakers, or was this all about his image from the beginning? By the time November arrived, there was no denying it anymore. Eric Carroll's story had completely fallen apart. The community that once believed in him, defended him, and saw him as a voice for justice had turned their backs. His credibility was gone, his silence spoke louder than his words, and the damage he caused could no longer be undone. But the saddest part wasn't Eric's downfall. It was what happened to the Whittakers in the aftermath. They were left broken, emotionally, financially, and publicly. What had started as an effort to share their humanity had ended with them being more isolated than ever. Reports from West Virginia painted a grim picture. Betty had stopped answering the door. Larry, once seen sitting outside quietly greeting visitors, had retreated indoors. Neighbors said the family seemed scared again, not of poverty, but of people. They had learned the hardest lesson possible. When the cameras leave, the kindness often does too. The people who had once brought them food, donations, and smiles were gone. The calls stopped. The excitement faded. And what was left was confusion, a feeling that they had been used for something bigger than themselves. Meanwhile, Eric tried one final push to reclaim his narrative. He went live again, the same tired format, the same defensive tone. He blamed gossip channels, fake stories, and online jealousy. He said Patrick was manipulating people for sympathy and that everyone had forgotten the good he had done. But nobody bought it. The chat filled with comments like, We believed you once. Not anymore. If you cared, you'd show receipts. Stop using them to make yourself look better. He ended the stream abruptly after a particularly brutal message scrolled across the screen. Eric, you became exactly what you claimed to fight against. And just like that, his words and his career hit a wall. Patrick, meanwhile, stayed quiet. He didn't gloat. He didn't take victory laps. He just kept doing what he'd been doing, staying low, focusing on rebuilding trust, and occasionally checking in on the family when he could. People started noticing that contrast more and more. Eric shouted. Patrick listened. Eric posted proofless defenses. Patrick quietly showed results. Eric fought for sympathy. Patrick tried to give it. And slowly, the narrative shifted permanently. Even those who had once despised Patrick began acknowledging that maybe he wasn't the monster people thought he was. Maybe he, too, had been misled by ambition, by hope, by trusting the wrong person. But at least he tried to make things right. Then came the most haunting detail of all. A report surfaced that Eric had been in talks with a production company about a new take on the Whittaker story. Emails leaked online appeared to show him pitching an idea for a docuseries exploring the darker side of small-town life, a concept suspiciously close to the family's reality. It was the final nail in the coffin for his reputation. So while they're struggling to survive, one viewer wrote, "He's shopping their pain around for a paycheck?" The outrage was immediate. People began mass reporting his social media pages. Sponsors quietly backed out. Collaborators deleted any trace of working with him. For a man who once prided himself on being transparent, he had become the very definition of deceit. But beyond the internet chaos, something deeper was happening, something tragic. Those closest to the Whittakers said the constant media attention had taken a toll. One of the younger relatives who occasionally appeared in videos had stopped going to town entirely. Betty had become distrustful of anyone carrying a camera. And even though they didn't fully understand the online drama, they could feel it. They could feel the tension, the betrayal, the shift from kindness to controversy. It was like the world had forgotten they were real people. Mark Lyta, the original documentarian who introduced the family to the world through his soft white underbelly series, reportedly tried to intervene privately. Mark's approach had always been different. He never sensationalized, he observed. But after seeing how far things had spiraled, he was said to be heartbroken by what had become of the story. "I just wanted people to see them as human," he allegedly told a friend. Now they've been turned into content. That sentiment hit home for many who had followed the story since the beginning. The Whittakers had gone from being a window into forgotten humanity to being pawns in a feud between online personalities. And the saddest part? They had no idea how big the fight had become. By mid-November, Eric's name had become synonymous with betrayal. Every new thread about him was filled with anger, disbelief, and disappointment. He had gone from hero to villain faster than anyone could have imagined. Patrick's name, by contrast, had softened in tone. People began talking about him as flawed but trying. It wasn't redemption in the full sense, but it was recognition. And that was more than Eric had left. At the heart of it all, though, the Whittakers remained the true victims. Their story had been stretched, dissected, monetized, and manipulated, and yet the fundamental issues that had drawn attention to them in the first place still remained: poverty, isolation, and a lack of proper care. All the online fighting, all the donation wars, all the egos, none of it had changed their reality. They still lived in that same small, weathered house. They still faced the same daily struggles. Only now, they were burdened with the scars of being turned into a public spectacle. Eric disappeared shortly after that final controversy broke. No new posts. No updates. No apologies. His accounts went dormant. His old videos were quietly taken down. The man who once demanded everyone look at the truth vanished when that truth turned against him. People speculated, had he left YouTube entirely? Was he still profiting behind the scenes? No one knew. And maybe no one cared anymore. Because by then, everyone had seen enough. In the end, the story of Eric Carroll and Patrick wasn't about who was right or wrong. It was about what happens when good intentions collide with ego. Both men claimed to help. Both made mistakes. But only one took responsibility. Patrick may not be perfect, but he faced the storm head-on. Eric ran from it. And that difference, the courage to confront versus the instinct to control, became the line that divided them forever. One last post summed it up perfectly. It came from a small fan page once dedicated to following updates about the family. The admin, tired of the drama, wrote, "At the start, we all said we wanted to help. But maybe what the Whittakers needed wasn't help. Maybe they needed peace. No cameras. No debates. Just peace." That post went viral. People started realizing that every view, every comment, every argument was part of the same cycle that had brought the family pain. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to let them rest. Months later, the dust began to settle. Eric was gone. Patrick had moved on. And the Whittakers were still there, quiet, forgotten again, but perhaps finally free from the spotlight that had done them more harm than good. Their story had come full circle. From obscurity to fame, from sympathy to scandal, from connection to chaos, and now back to silence. And in that silence, there was finally something honest. Something the cameras could never capture. Because in the end, what people will remember isn't who won the argument or who made the most money. They'll remember the faces of a family that reminded the world what poverty, loyalty, and survival really look like. And they'll remember how quickly the people claiming to help them turned that humanity into content. Eric Carroll's fall wasn't just the collapse of a YouTuber's reputation. It was a mirror held up to everyone who ever consumed the story for entertainment. Maybe that's the lesson here, that empathy isn't a video. It's a responsibility. So as the story of the Whittakers fades once again into the quiet hills of West Virginia, one question lingers for everyone who followed along. Did we really want to help them? Or did we just want to watch? Comment below. Do you think it's time for everyone, creators, fans, and the media, to finally let the Whittakers live in peace? Or should their story continue to be told, even after all the damage done? Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.